My name is Major Emily Carter, and in the middle of a sun-bleached airfield, my own brother smirked and said loud enough for the row of folding chairs to hear, "She's here to pour coffee." The dust swirled between boots, catching the wind in little spirals that stung your eyes if you weren't careful. Behind the formation, a pair of Black Hawks sat with rotors, still their blades ticking in the hot breeze. The smell of jet fuel hung faint but sharp in the air, the scent of work about to start again as soon as the speeches were done. Ryan stood 2 rows over his cover, tipped back chin high. He'd come in with the last rotation from his infantry company, swagger intact shoulders, squared like he'd never put a foot wrong in his life. To his left, one of his buddies gave a quick laugh, like the joke wasn't cruel, just a little truth in family shorthand. The battalion commander stepped to the microphone, voice cutting through the open space like a bell. Effective immediately, he said, "Major Emily Carter will assume command of the 47th Combat Sustainment Support Battalion." I saw Ryan's head turn just enough for our eyes to meet. The smirk was gone, replaced by the flicker of calculation the moment someone realizes the story they've been telling about you no longer works. "Major Carter," the commander said front and center. The formation snapped to attention. The guidon bearer pivoted. I stepped forward, my boots finding the baked earth in a rhythm drilled into muscle memory over years of ceremonies I'd only watched before. When I reached the commander, the guidon, the unit's colors changed hands. I wrapped my fingers around the staff, its weight solid and cool despite the sun. Command. Not as an idea, not as a goal on paper, but as something you could hold. "Ma'am," the commander said quietly, "she's yours." I nodded, took my place at the front of the formation, and let the moment stretch just long enough to burn into memory. My brother didn't move. That was the top layer. The rest of it, the road from shadow to this patch of dust in a foreign country, had started a long way from here. 2 hours earlier, the FOB was already humming. The mess hall smelled like scorched coffee and powdered eggs, the kind that go rubbery if they sit too long on the steam line. Outside, the sun was just clearing the perimeter walls, painting the sky in pale orange and gold. I'd walked the motor pool before breakfast like I always did, checking the fuel trucks, the pallets of bottled water stacked under camo, netting the lines of tan helmets waiting for their next run. Logistics doesn't stop for ceremonies. You make sure the machine keeps moving even when the focus shifts to flags and speeches. I'd crossed paths with Ryan in the corridor outside the talk. He gave me a chin lift, casual, dismissive. "Big day for you," he said. "Big day for the unit," I corrected. He grinned. "Sure, but don't get nervous. Just pour the coffee straight and you'll be fine." I let it slide. If there's one thing the Army teaches you, it's how to choose which shots are worth firing. Now, as the commander finished his remarks for the crowd, I kept my eyes forward, my grip steady on the guidon. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "your new commander." The applause was polite, measured the kind that fits the formal cadence of military tradition. I gave a short speech, just a few lines about readiness, about trust, about the simple fact that our job was to make sure no one ever missed a mission, because they lacked what we could provide. When it was done, the band played the Army song. Voices lifted in the familiar words. I didn't look toward my brother again. This wasn't about him. But I did notice that when the formation was dismissed, he didn't head straight for the coffee table. We were born 10 minutes apart and light years away. Ryan first, all red-faced certainty and clenched fists. Me second, quiet as if I'd shown up to take notes. That's how the family told it anyway. They liked beginnings that predicted endings. Our grandfather had served in Korea. An uncle wore marine dress blues in photos that never made it off the hallway wall. Our mother kept a cedar chest with folded flags, old campaign medals and letters written in neat, cramped script that smelled faintly of the paper's own memory. Service was the family's grammar. Sentences were built with rank and duty stations and the names of commanders who still sent Christmas cards. By elementary school, Ryan was already leading backyard patrols. He'd tape cardboard radio boxes to his belt and assign missions like he owned the block. I was tagged supply. I hauled the water bottles, patched holes in the fort roof with duct tape, kept a list of who needed what. Once I asked to trade roles for a day, let me carry the walkie and issue orders. He shrugged like a king, granting audience. Sure, he said, but you'll hate it. An hour later, he took the radio back before I'd finished a sentence. You talk too slow, he said, and ran off to take the hill behind the garage. At school, he was louder. I was steadier. He tried out for everything: loud, football, debate, drumline. I learned quiet timing, cross-country orchestra study groups that finished projects before the due date. He aced charisma. I aced exams. At the dinner table, our father would lean back and say, "That's leadership," whenever Ryan told a story that ended with laughter. When I mentioned the calculus team winning regionals, he'd smile and say, "That'll help," like I'd stocked a pantry. We both aimed at West Point. Ryan announced it first sophomore year on the 50-yard line after a game he'd barely played in. I put my application together, one neat page at a time, careful with commas, relentless with deadlines. Ryan got his nomination through a family friend, a congressman, who shook his hand like a trophy presentation. I got mine from a woman who ran a district office out of a strip mall, the kind of place with a flickering neon open sign that never turned off. She looked me in the eye and said, "Your essays are clean. Your record's cleaner. Don't give anyone your pen." At reception day, we stood in the same courtyard, civilians for the last time. Ryan winked at me and said, "Try to keep up." Then the cadre yelled and the day began, and we were both reduced to numbers stenciled into our chests. The academy levels everyone. It doesn't care who made your introduction. Ryan thrived in the loud places, plebe boxing football games, the mess hall rituals that rewarded showmanship. I learned the geographies that don't get photographed. The library at 0100, the echoing stairwell where you could run the hill work. No one saw the way. Your hands remembered a rifle's balance in the dark. On land nav, I beat him to every point by minutes. On the obstacle course, he beat me by seconds. We never compared notes, we compared results. He chose infantry like the story required. I chose ordnance with a logistics track. At the branch night ceremony, he bumped my shoulder and grinned. "Support," he said with the kind of smile that implies a finish line. "Good for you." I looked at the patch sewn crooked to his sleeve and thought about how conviction is just confidence in an untested plan. "Good for both of us," I said. "You'll need beans, bullets, and fuel, and I'll know where to find them." Mom threw us a small party the weekend after. Neighborhood people came by with casseroles and stories about their own sons and daughters who'd worn uniforms. Ryan held the living room like a field. He gestured big. He made everyone laugh. A retired sergeant major who'd known our grandfather listened to Ryan describe Ranger School as if it were a foregone conclusion, then turned to me. "What about you?" he asked. "Logistics," I said. "Sustainment." He nodded, like someone who'd just found the missing part in an engine. "That's the backbone. Nobody moves without you." Our aunt raised a glass and said with a smile too bright, "And nobody breaks a glass ceiling without help." The room nodded at the word help. I sipped water and counted the plates we'd need to wash when the lights went out. On graduation day, the parade ground burned hot under our shoes. We stood 2 rows apart, diplomas in hand, cadet life, reduced to a thin velvet folder, and 100,000 small decisions you never brag about. Afterwards, photos, all combinations, him with his buddies, me with mine, the 2 of us with our parents, the obligatory cousins and their kids who climbed our legs like ropes. Someone asked where we'd go first. Ryan said Benning, like launching a missile. I said Hood, like laying track. Different answers, same oath. Our first postings ran parallel for a while. He sent home pictures from the field, mud, sweat, a grin that belonged on a recruiting poster. I sent home lists that looked boring unless you knew what they meant. 1, 200 tires staged. 80 pallets of MREs moved forward. 2 MRAP engines rebuilt in a single night. I didn't write the stories about 0300 phone calls from a convoy lead whose voice shook while he read coordinates. I didn't write that I cut my own sleep into rations so another unit could roll at dawn. We crossed paths once in Germany during a joint exercise. He had a weekend pass. I had a maintenance backlog that didn't care about weekends. We met for coffee in a corner of the PX. He looked at his watch twice, while I outlined why a ground-up rebuild would save us downtime later. You should be in the field, he said not unkindly. This admin stuff is choking you. I laughed, then didn't. Ryan, if I choke, your trucks don't arrive. He shrugged like someone changing lanes without signaling. We all do our part. We deployed within months of each other, different units, different maps. On my first convoy brief overseas, I watched new drivers memorize the names of roads that used to be farm tracks and were now arteries. I learned the voices of route clearance leaders by how they inhaled before they spoke. I kept a running mental ledger of where I could borrow air assets, who'd tango with us on throughput, who'd say yes if I asked like I meant it. Family emails slid into the space between missions. Mom wrote long notes about neighbors' holidays, a new recipe that probably tasted like home if you had an oven. Dad sent links to articles he thought we'd like. Ryan sent photos of the guys grinning around a burn barrel. When I wrote about ration cycle adjustments that saved us 2 days on turnaround, he replied, "That's nice. We've got a live fire tomorrow." When he wrote about a patrol that went sideways and righted itself, I replied, "Proud of you. Check your fuel filters. Sand's been bad down south." The rivalry stayed polite. Polite can be sharper than angry if you're not careful. We both started sentences with, "You wouldn't understand," then deleted them because we did. We understood too much. He carried lives at the tip of the spear. I carried them in the length of the shaft. What never changed was the shape of the room when we were both in it. People turned toward him when he walked in. They turned to me when a plan needed a spine. I stopped wanting the first. I trained for the second. Years later, when orders cut me for XO to a combat sustainment battalion, I remembered the backyard radio. Who gets to speak, who gets heard, who keeps the list, and makes sure water shows up where boys with cardboard radios forget they ever asked for it? The difference now was simple. The list had tankers and howitzers on it, and the voice on the other end of the net called me ma'am, because they knew if I was on something would happen that needed to. Ryan's path brought him to the same country by a different road. We were in the same theater without sharing a map. He still told stories that made rooms laugh. I still moved things that made rooms possible. None of that was loud, but it was leading all the same. The first time I heard Ryan's voice over the radio in theater, I was standing in the TIOC at Oro 200, nursing a bitter cup of coffee that tasted like it had been strained through a sock. The convoy net was busy background chatter vehicle status checks, the occasional joke muttered in that flat, deadpan way soldiers have when they're running long miles in the dark. Then his call sign came through, clear as if he were standing next to me. "This is Alpha 2-1, Ryan's voice said. "We're holding at Checkpoint Delta. Fuel truck ETA." I glanced at the whiteboard where convoy positions were tracked in color-coded magnets. Alpha 2-1's column was highlighted. My XO instincts kicked in. 2 hours behind, I told the NCO at the comms desk, "Tell them we've got it rerouted. We'll shave 20 off that." The NCO relayed the update. There was a pause on the net, and then Ryan again. "Copy. Appreciate it, whoever's moving the pieces." I didn't say it was me. I didn't need to. The mission tempo that month was brutal. Supply lines stretched thin between bases that had been little more than dust and HESCO barriers a few years earlier. Every mile was a gamble between time to rain and the fact that enemy eyes were always on the roads. My battalion was the artery feeding 3 brigades, and if we so much as hiccuped, entire operations slowed. In that heat, with the pressure that comes when you know routine missions aren't routine, family becomes something you manage, not something you rest in. Ryan and I were close enough to bump into each other in the DFAC once both mid-shift, both wolfing down food like we had somewhere else to be, which we did. "Long night?" he asked. I nodded. "Long month." He gave that half smile he had like he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure if I'd laugh or punch him. "You look tired." "Good tired," I said. "The kind you earn." He just grunted. We didn't talk about who had it harder. Out here, hard is relative, and it doesn't help to compare scars before they're even done forming. Things shifted in the second half of deployment. My unit took over a high-volume distribution hub near the border, a place where trucks rolled day and night moving everything from ammo pallets to refrigerated containers full of blood and vaccines. That meant I was on site more than at HQ, and I started hearing whispers about a big regional conference being planned, a joint NATO logistics summit that would bring together commanders from across the theater. Rumor had it the keynote speaker slot was still open. The thought never crossed my mind that I'd be considered. Keynotes were for flag officers, for the names already etched into the brass of the system. I figured it'd go to someone with a bigger title and a better public affairs record. But one night, as I was checking the manifest for an incoming airlift, the brigade commander stopped by. "Carter," he said, "how would you feel about addressing the conference next month?" I stared at him for a beat. "Sir? Me? You've kept this place running under stress most units wouldn't survive," he said. "They need to hear that from someone doing it, not just reading slides." I said yes before I could second guess. Word travels fast in theater, faster than fuel or mail. Within a week, my inbox was stacked with messages from officers I'd barely met, offering advice on presentation slides, data points, stories that would land well with the brass. One of them, a major from Ryan's unit, ended his email with, "By the way, I didn't even know you and Ryan were related until last week." I didn't reply to that part. When I finally told Ryan, it was over a scratchy DSN call that kept cutting out. "They're putting you on stage," he asked, the static making his voice jagged. "Apparently so." He didn't say congratulations. Instead, he laughed, not mean, but surprised. "Guess they want the coffee poured and the trucks on time." "I'll be sure to save you a front row seat," I said, because humor's cheaper than a fight when you're 8,000 miles from home. The weeks leading up to the conference were a blur of missions and prep. I'd give my morning brief jump into convoys and then stay up late refining my notes. I wanted to make the speech sharp, not flashy, just undeniable. One night, going over my outline, I caught myself thinking about when we were kids. Ryan had always been the one with the megaphone. I was the one making sure the batteries in it actually worked. And maybe, just maybe, this was the same story, except the batteries were finally speaking for themselves. The day before the conference, I flew to the host base on a rattling C-130. The air inside was metallic and dry, the drone of the engines steady as a heartbeat. When we landed, I stepped out into heat, so sharp it felt like opening an oven. An aide handed me a schedule, neatly printed my name, slotted right under the conference logo in bold. That night, I walked past the big canvas tent where the ceremony would be held. Inside, crews were setting up rows of chairs, the stage draped with both the U.S. and NATO flags. In the front row, 2 placards caught my eye. COL, Ryan Carter, and 2 seats over Madge. Emily, Carter, keynote speaker. I almost laughed. For years, he'd had the better seat in the game, in the room, in the family's idea of who mattered. Now the chairs said otherwise. I went back to my quarters and slept hard. Tomorrow the room would turn toward me, and I wasn't going to waste a second of it. Morning broke hot, and still the kind of heat that makes you question why your uniform has long sleeves. The compound smelled faintly of diesel, and the faint tang of the chow hall's overcooked bacon drifting across the tarmac. I'd been up since before sunrise, not because I couldn't sleep, but because my mind was already in the tent, running through opening lines, timing, breathing. The NATO Logistics Conference wasn't a small affair. Inside the main tent, the air conditioning units hummed against the wall panels, fighting to hold back the desert heat. Rows of chairs faced a low stage lined with flags from 20 different countries. Military police in crisp uniforms stood at the entrances, scanning every ID with the unblinking patience of people who do this for a living. By the time I arrived, the first 2 speakers, both colonels, were already on stage talking about throughput rates, convoy security, and cross-border clearance times. Their words were technical, the kind of language you understand if you've been in the trenches of supply chains. But I noticed something. The crowd was polite, attentive, not alive. I took my seat in the front row, directly behind the reserved placard. Ryan was 3 chairs to my right in full dress uniform, ribbons gleaming. He leaned back in his chair, his elbow resting on the armrest, fingers tapping absently. He caught my eye just long enough to give a small, unreadable smile. The moderator, a Navy commander with a voice that could have cut through a hurricane, stepped up to the podium. "Our next speaker needs no introduction, but she's getting one anyway," he said, grinning at his own joke. "From the 47th Combat Sustainment Support Battalion, Major Emily Carter." The applause started light, then grew as people turned to look. I caught the shift in Ryan's posture, a small, almost imperceptible straightening. Walking to the stage, I thought about the weight of the boots on my feet, the way the air felt just a touch cooler. Near the AC vents, the smell of canvas and polish that every military ceremony seems to share. I didn't rush. The stage was low, but the moment was high, and I wanted to step into it without flinching. At the podium, I set my notes down, but didn't look at them yet. "Good morning," I began. When I took command of my battalion, the first thing I told my soldiers was this: our job isn't glamorous. No one writes movies about fuel convoys or frozen rations, but without us, the rest doesn't move. A few heads nodded. I told them about the night a fuel truck broke down on the only route in, and we stripped it down by headlamp to get the mission back on track. About the time we convoyed through 2 sandstorms to deliver medical supplies before the temperature made them useless. I talked about the quiet professionals, the mechanics, the supply clerks, the drivers who made it happen without expecting applause. Somewhere in the third story, the energy in the room shifted. People leaned forward. A few even laughed at one of the smaller anecdotes I dropped in about an entire pallet of MREs getting liberated by a curious camel. I closed with this: command has no gender. Competence has no rank ceiling. The mission doesn't care what you look like, it cares if you deliver. The applause came fast and warm. I shook the moderator's hand, stepped down, and walked back to my seat. Ryan didn't say anything, but I saw his jaw flex. During the break, officers milled around with coffee cups, the smell of burnt roast filling the air. Several came up to shake my hand to ask about fuel routing algorithms or maintenance cycle tracking. It was the kind of respect you can't request in an invitation, it has to be earned in the doing. Ryan stayed back at first. Then just as the next session was starting, he stepped over. "You didn't choke," he said quietly. I smiled, and I didn't pour coffee. His mouth twitched like he might laugh, but he didn't. Instead, he gave a small nod and went back to his seat. That night after the conference wrapped, I walked the compound alone. The desert air was cooler, the sky smeared with stars, in a way you never see back home. The lights from the tents glowed like small determined fires. I thought about the speech, the reactions, and the fact that tomorrow it would be back to work as usual, except maybe not quite the same. Respect, once it's out in the open, has a way of changing the ground it stands on. 2 weeks after the conference, the official photos hit the Defense Media Network. There I was, hand on the podium, the NATO and U.S. flags framing my shoulders, the caption reading, "Major Emily Carter addresses multinational logistics commanders." I didn't think much of it at first. Speeches happen, photos get filed, life moves on. But the morning the image circulated through official channels, my inbox lit up. A colonel from EUCOM's logistics division emailed impressive delivery. "Have you considered applying for the Joint Operational Command rotation?" I read it twice. That wasn't the kind of invite you ignored. Before I could respond, my battalion commander called me in. "Carter," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "you've made some waves. Good waves." The conference feedback was glowing. "Hire's been watching, and they want you to take lead on a forward logistics coordination team." I leaned back slightly. "Sir, that's an O5 billet." He smiled. Acting position for now, but if you want it, I'll back you. Consider this your shot." I didn't answer right away. My mind flicked back to Ryan, to the look he'd given me during the conference. Part of me wondered how this would sit with him. The other part, the larger part, reminded me that I hadn't come here to keep anyone comfortable. "I'll take it," I said. The next month was a whirlwind. The team I inherited was small but sharp, a mix of seasoned warrant officers and young lieutenants hungry to prove themselves. We worked across multiple commands, solving problems before they hit the formal report stage, rerouting shipments in hours instead of days, negotiating fuel swaps that kept squadrons flying. It was the kind of job where you didn't wait to be told. You saw the gap, you moved to fill it, and you made damn sure no one had to ask twice. One night, deep into a long planning cycle, I got word Ryan's unit would be moving supplies through one of our corridors. I checked the manifest. His convoy was slated for a route I knew was getting hammered with IED activity. I called the liaison officer immediately. "Push them south 2 clicks," I said. "Keep them off Highway Red." The LO hesitated. "We've already got movement clearance for Red. And you'll lose trucks if you stick to it. Reroute now." They did. 2 hours later, a patrol reported an IED detonation on Red Right, where Ryan's lead truck would have been. I didn't tell him. By late spring, the Joint Command posted the official notice my acting billet was converting to permanent. I'd be pinned as a lieutenant commander in the summer. The ceremony would be public joint services, multinational presence, the works. The invitation list went out and my family got theirs. That's when the first rumble hit. I was back in my quarters, reviewing shipment clearance logs, when my phone pinged with a text from my cousin. "Heads up, your aunt and Ryan are talking. She's only invited because of us," is the quote. I stared at the screen for a long beat. The irony was almost funny. 2 weeks later, I was home on leave, sitting at my parents' kitchen table. Ryan was there, leaning against the counter with a beer. My aunt sat across from me, arms folded. "So she said, big day coming up. You must be excited." "I am," I said evenly. Ryan smirked. "Guess you should thank us for making sure you got on that guest list." I looked at him for a long moment. "Ryan, you think an invitation gives someone a seat. Command earns it." He frowned, not used to me pushing back so directly. My aunt shifted in her chair. "You'll see," she said with a little shrug. "It's all about who you know." I smiled, the small, tight kind you use when you know something they don't. "Sometimes," I said. "Other times, it's about what you've done when no one's watching." They didn't press. In the weeks before the ceremony, I buried myself in work. I had zero interest in feeding whatever narrative they were trying to write. The truth was simple. I'd put in the hours taken. The calls at 0300 made the decisions that carried weight. And whether they clapped or not, I'd still walk across that stage. I knew the Navy band would be playing. I also knew exactly how fast an invitation could turn to silence when the name being called wasn't the one they expected. The morning of the pinning was clear and sharp, the kind of summer day that made the harbor glitter like polished steel. The base's parade field overlooked the water, and the Navy band was already in formation when I arrived. I could hear the low, steady hum of tuning notes, the occasional sharp blare of a trumpet checking pitch. I was in full dress, whites the jacket pressed crisp enough to cut air. The silver oak leaves on my shoulders caught the sun as I walked up the side path, the scent of salt water riding the breeze. Around me, guests were filtering into the rows of white folding chairs. I could see my parents seated near the front. My aunt was beside them, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and that smile she always used at weddings, polite, tight, not quite reaching her eyes. Ryan stood next to her in dress blues, hands clasped behind his back. He glanced my way and gave the smallest nod as if to acknowledge that today was not a day for the coffee joke. The master of ceremonies, a commander with a booming voice, took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this special day. Today, we recognize those who have demonstrated exceptional leadership, operational excellence, and unwavering commitment to service." The first few minutes rolled through commendations for others being promoted. Families clapped, camera shutters clicked, and the scent of sunscreen drifted through the crowd as the sun climbed higher. Then the MC looked at his clipboard, smiled, and lifted his head. "And now, would the band please stand by?" The Navy band's conductor raised his baton. The first few bars of "Anchors Away" rang out crisp and unmistakable. "Rear Admiral Designate Major Emily Carter on deck," the MC's voice carried over the music. Heads turned. My aunt, mid-conversation with my mother, froze. Ryan's eyes widened a fraction, but I caught it. She sat down hard, like someone had just knocked the wind out of her. I stepped forward. The deck under the canopy felt solid, warm under the soles of my shoes. The band played on the snare drum, keeping perfect time. I walked past rows of sailors, soldiers and airmen standing at attention, their eyes forward, but their respect palpable in the stillness. The admiral overseeing the ceremony met me at center stage. We exchanged salutes, then he motioned for the aide to step forward with the insignia. The aide removed the silver oak leaves from my shoulders, replacing them with the single silver star, Rear Admiral, lower half. I felt the weight shift slight, but unmistakable. The admiral's voice was steady, but there was something personal in it when he said, "You've commanded with clarity, delivered with precision, and led with the kind of quiet strength this uniform needs more of. Congratulations, Admiral Carter." Applause broke like a wave across the field. I turned toward the crowd, scanning just enough to see my aunt clapping a touch too slowly, and Ryan staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. When the ceremony ended, people lined up to shake my hand. The band packed up the smell of brass polish and sweat mixing in the summer air. My parents came up first. My mother hugged me tightly. My father clapped me on the shoulder. My aunt approached next. "Well," she said, forcing a smile, "I suppose you didn't need us for that guest list after all." I smiled back. Invitations get you a chair. Respect gets you the deck. Ryan came up last. He didn't joke. He just looked at me for a long moment before saying, "You earned it. That's all I'll say." "That's all you need to say?" I replied. Later, as the sun dipped toward the water, I walked down to the pier. The gulls were circling overhead, their cries cutting through the steady lapping of the tide. My new insignia caught the last of the light, and I let the moment settle. Because titles fade, ceremonies end, and applause dies down. But the work you've done, the ground you've held, that stays. And sometimes the sweetest payback isn't in the words you say, but in the silence you hold when the deck is finally yours. 3 days after the ceremony, I was back at my desk in the operations building. The stack of reports waiting for me was taller than my coffee mug, and the air smelled faintly of copier toner and the antiseptic tang of freshly scrubbed floors. Rank didn't come with fewer problems, only bigger ones. I'd barely gotten through the first logistics update when my phone buzzed with a text. "Unknown number. Saw you on Defense News. Good to know the rumors about you were wrong." No name, no signature, just that. I didn't reply. That weekend, I went home for a brief visit. It was a warm Saturday, the kind of summer day when the neighborhood smells like cut grass and barbecue smoke. I pulled up to my parents' house in my pickup, the uniform packed away in a garment bag behind the seat. No need to wear it today, not for them, not for anyone. My father was in the driveway watering the hedges. My mother came out with a glass of iced tea. And then my aunt stepped through the side gate sunglasses, perched on her head, wearing that guarded expression again. We sat at the patio table, the sun cutting shadows across the deck. She cleared her throat. "About the ceremony," she began. I sipped my tea. I didn't realize. She stopped pressing her lips together, like she was measuring her words. "Didn't realize how much you'd done, or how much you were respected." I gave a small shrug. Not everyone needs to realize. I didn't do it for awareness. She let out a short breath, maybe a laugh, maybe not. "Well, you looked like you belonged up there." "I did," I said, my tone even. "Because I earned it." She nodded once. And for the first time, she didn't try to make the moment hers. Later that night, I drove down to the waterfront alone. The harbor was quiet, except for the occasional slap of waves against the dock pilings. The salt air was cool on my skin, the stars sharp overhead. I thought about the years that had led here, the missed holidays, the 2 a.m. calls, the cold meals eaten on the hood of a Humvee, the convoy routes memorized like scripture, the countless names of those I'd served alongside, some gone now, some still out there carrying the weight. And I thought about Ryan's coffee joke, my aunt's smug certainty about invitations, all the sideways glances and quiet dismissals I'd endured. They'd been wrong, but proving it was never the mission. The mission was the work. The proof was just the byproduct. In the weeks that followed, the Navy band's clip of my walk to the deck made its rounds online. People I hadn't heard from in years sent messages proud of you. Saw you on the feed. Didn't know you'd made Admiral. Some wanted to know the story. I told a few. Most of the time, I just let the video speak for itself. Because silence, I'd learned, can be the loudest kind of answer. Final reflection and call to action. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone has ever tried to shrink you down to what they could understand or told you your place was anywhere but where you stand, now remember this: you don't owe them a speech. You don't owe them proof on their timeline. You keep working. You keep showing up. And one day, you'll find yourself exactly where you were meant to be, with or without their applause. And when that day comes, let the silence do the talking. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who's walking their own uphill road. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, consider subscribing. We tell them here, where rank isn't given, it's earned.